Well, good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar from Ecoprod in partnership with the Water Retail Company. The topic for today, a practical guide for building owners, but how to ensure your water is safe before your business reopens, your business, your building, your facility, whatever it might be. So before we get started on the core of the presentation, Jacob, could you just do the next slide for me, please? I've just got a few housekeeping points before we start. We are recording the session today. So once we're finished, we'll be able to get a link for you so you can watch that back or share it with colleagues if you'd like to. There'll also be an opportunity to download the slides in that link as well. You'll note the lines are all muted this morning. We do have a large number of people attending today. We have you all on mute, so we can't hear you, but you can still ask questions and so on. There's a chat and a Q&A function in the GoToWebinar control panel. Please do feel free to ask as we go along. We're hoping to have time at the end for questions, so I will be collating those through the session so that we can put those to our panelists at the end. So next slide, please, Jacob. The agenda is just a few introductions from us and from the Water Retail Company, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation, which will be presented by Jacob Tompkins, our core presenter today, talking through the steps that you need to take before you reopen a building to make sure that your water is safe. And as I say, hopefully leaving 10-15 minutes-ish at the end for questions to the panel. So introductions. There are three of us talking today. So there's myself, Rachel Clinton. I'm on the business development team here at Ecoprod. Could you just move the slide on, please, Jacob? I also have Marcus Rose, who's the MD of Ecoprod, and Jacob Tompkins from the Water Retail Company. So to do some introductions of our two companies, Marcus, I think at this point I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to keep this introduction brief, as the main purpose of this webinar is to hear some step-by-step advice from Jacob. But just some background. I'm the founder of Ecoprod, having trained and operated as a mechanical engineer. I have 30+ years experience around the application of products and services within commercial properties, but more specifically the commercial washroom environment. The Ecoprod story began during 2006, where I saw the need to address water and energy saving within commercial properties. If for a moment we cast our minds back to 2003, 2004, 2005, if you remember, we had 3 consecutive very dry winters, resulting in a serious drought in the spring of 06, which especially impacted London and the southeast. As most would know, water resilience is a real issue in parts of the UK due to changes in rainfall patterns, but also added to this is population growth and urban development. At Ecoprod, our passion is water saving and sustainability, and here in the UK we represent manufacturers of high quality products that are also available worldwide. The whole Ecoprod team adopt a consultative approach to sales, whereby we engage with our clients to provide value-added solutions. Firstly, we find out the customer's needs and wants, and then follow that through with a spend to save analysis that ultimately delivers a return on investment promise. Yes, this is all backed by water saving, but more than that, it can include longevity of product, reduced maintenance, and in some cases, reactive maintenance is eradicated. We also provide whole washroom design service, where we aim to work with prospects to make their washroom spaces function more effectively. Just to explain, I have known and have been connected with Jacob since 2007. I've always appreciated and valued his expert, no-nonsense advice on everything and anything related to water, be that supply, management, or control and waste mitigation, and of course efficiencies, which is our focus. So I would now like to introduce Professor Jacob Tompkins.
Thank you, Marcus. I think I need you to introduce me whenever I do a talk. That's great. Yeah, my name's Jacob Tompkins. I am the Chief Technology Officer at the Water Retail Company. We are what the name says. So we are one of the new retail companies that sell water and wastewater services across the UK. We're mainly focused on water efficiency, and we work closely with clients on all aspects of water management. My background is in academia first, and then as a water advisor at Water UK, which is a trade body for the UK water industry, and then I set up an organisation called Waterwise, which promotes water efficiency. And now, as I say, I'm the technology officer at the Water Retail Company. I'm a visiting prof at Exeter, and I'm in the process of setting up a water technology accelerator for Europe. But this is specifically about businesses reopening. So this is the advice that we've been giving to our clients. And I know that Marcus has been sharing with a lot of his clients. So we're delighted to be doing this in conjunction with Ecoprod, who we've worked with for a very long time and are experts in design of washrooms, water systems, automation, digital water, all that sort of stuff. So it's great. So Rachel, can I just launch straight into it now?
Please do. Go ahead.
Right. So I'm doing the slides, and this is not my area of expertise. So if it goes wrong, sorry, that's my fault. Right. Hidden risk of water contamination. So we're all still dealing with the COVID-19 stuff, and sorry to put more stuff on your plate, but there is another potential risk. So businesses close down across the country at very short notice. So normally when a business closes down for the summer or for a recess, you can drain your water systems, you can make sure everything's shut off, you can have all the plans in place, but businesses had to close down within a few days. That meant that a lot of water tanks were left full, that systems were not drained down, and some of the businesses that closed down have probably never been closed for 2 or 3 months before. So in the UK, we have some of the best tap water in the world. It is highly chlorinated, which kills any waterborne diseases within it, but the effects of the chlorine only last for about a week. So if you think that water has been sitting in the pipes of your business for 2-3 months, this water is stagnant. This becomes, and then quite often when companies close down, it's over the winter period or over the autumn or over the spring, where the temperature is not that high. What we're seeing at the moment are quite large variations in temperature and quite high temperatures. So it's unusual. It's different to a normal winter shutdown. So we're seeing stagnant water, we're seeing high temperatures, and this is a perfect breeding ground for bacteria. And what happens is something called biofilm will build up on the inside of the pipe. So that's basically just slime. So you're getting a combination of scale being deposited out of the water, and then that acting as a substrate for bacteria to grow on. And probably the most deadly of the lot is Legionella. Legionnaire's disease is a type of pneumonia, and that occurs when Legionella bacteria goes deep into the lungs. Now, Legionella grows in stagnant water at temperatures between 20 degrees centigrade and 60 degrees centigrade. So, not wishing to alarm you, but when you reopen your buildings, there may well be Legionella or other bacteria and biofilm and a whole load of other risks within the building. So what we're doing is, we don't want to scare people, but we just want to give you some basic advice on how you can open the building safely. So those are the risks. So yeah, water contamination can kill. We're very lucky in the UK that it doesn't very often. And we just expect tap water to be fine, which is why when your employees or your tenants return to the building, they will assume that the water system is fine. However, employers and landlords have a legal duty of care, and they have specific duties around exposure to Legionella. So you are legally responsible for the quality of water in your building if you are a landlord or if you're an employer. I would suggest that you need a water management plan to be put in place before you reopen your buildings. Now that sounds very fancy, but that can be anywhere from just sitting down with your staff or your senior management and saying, okay, what are we going to do, through to a full-on management plan with an external company. It's also worth checking your insurance to see that you're fully covered when your building reopens. I'm sure that people probably do not do this. So the concern is that buildings will open, and some buildings have already opened, without checking their water first, which means that people are at risk, employees are at risk, and you are at risk of potential prosecution. So the first bit is protect your staff. So you need to warn your staff of the danger. Obviously, you don't want to send around a mass email saying, oh my God, we're all going to die, but something along the lines of just beware of water quality within the buildings. The other issue is that the symptoms of Legionella are very similar to those for COVID-19. And there was a recent publication in the Lancet showing that in China, 20% of the people who had COVID-19 also had Legionella. So when you are going to be cleaning out your systems, you need to make sure that the staff doing this are wearing appropriate personal protection equipment. Mainly this is masks to prevent water aerosols, so small droplets of water getting into the lungs. There are WHO guidelines for what type of mask, but frankly, these are difficult to get hold of at the moment. So any type of face covering or anything that will stop water particles getting into the mouth and into the lungs should be worn. We'll go on to the bit about opening the outlets and what you're supposed to do, but just beware that the water in your building could be contaminated. It's fairly easy to deal with, but just be aware of the risk and make sure your staff are aware of the risk. So the first thing to do is to identify the water aspects within your building. Now that sounds fairly obvious, but it's not. So you've got hot water systems linked to your boiler. You've got cold water systems, so stuff where your taps come out, but there are other things that you may not have thought of. So water coolers, coffee machines, even kettles. Sometimes, so water coolers may have large bottle fed rather than fed off the mains. I would suggest that you replace those, that you clean all of the valves and outlets. In terms of coffee machines or ice machines, you've got to do the same. You've got to dispose of the ice that's within the machine and run them through. You've got to clean the nozzles. Even kettles, I would suggest that you empty the kettle out and wipe the inside, particularly the area where there was interface between air and water, where you will get calcium deposits and biofilm buildup. So any of these things where there is water in contact, just clean them like you would if you came back after a long break, or you would if you were doing a deep clean of the office. But just be aware that it is not only mains water. The other bit, fountains and water features. Might sound a bit strange, and you probably have ways of cleaning these already, but if they've been turned off, they'll be sitting there stagnant. As soon as you start them up, you are creating particles of water into the air. So might be worth emptying and disinfecting those. Likewise, cooling towers, air conditioning systems, water reuse systems, all of these have the potential for spreading bacterial contamination. Things like cooling towers and more sophisticated bits of kit or water-based air conditioning systems, you need to check the manufacturer's instructions or get in an internal expert. Drains and traps are down there as well, which sounds unusual because that is not from the mains water. The reason there is that if you've quite often floor drains, particularly in kitchens, will have a water trap to prevent smell and odor coming back up from the sewer. These will have evaporated over 2 to 3 months. So you need to chuck a bucket of water down to re-establish the trap. Otherwise, you will get sewer gases coming back into the building. The other bit, irrigation equipment and sprinklers. So quite often irrigation equipment, for instance, at race courses and things, is shut off out of season. So people are fully aware of how to restart irrigation equipment. The difference here is irrigation equipment is quite often shut off during the winter. We've seen this into spring and early summer. So the water within the irrigation networks will have been a lot warmer than normal. So I would suggest that you have to wear a mask when you're reinstating your irrigation equipment, particularly because of the aerosols that are generated. I think it might also be worth making sure that you flush through any irrigation equipment. So a lot of these things, businesses that are closed over the winter or for a few weeks a year, probably know how to restart their water systems and clean them out. But this is different. It's a longer period than normal, and the temperature's been different. So just be aware of that, and also make sure that the staff, who are probably very knowledgeable about restarting these systems, make sure that they wear PPE, because they probably don't. Okay, develop a water plan. So this is before you open. So generally, you need to make sure that you've got that this work is all done 24 hours before people come into the building. I would suggest that you should always have a water plan anyway, so this is worth doing. You need to report to senior management level, and you need to check. So there are several reasons for doing this. One is that it ensures the safety of your staff and your customers. The second one is that you'll be able to document that you've done the right thing. So if anything does go wrong, it reduces the likelihood of prosecution. It also makes sure that your insurance is in place. But thirdly, it will give you the opportunity to actually think about water use within your business, whether you're using the right equipment, whether there's an opportunity for refurbishing washrooms or things like this to make them more efficient in the long term. To think about whether you're paying the right price for water. Water is not a thing that people normally think about. And as a water retail company, one of the things we've seen during the shutdown is it's given people an opportunity to identify large levels of leakage. So you could look at this shutdown and the reboot of your water as an opportunity to look at your water systems. And I would suggest that if you do develop a water plan for reopening, you keep that live going forward and think about how you maintain your water systems. Okay, so what action should you take? As I said, 24 hours before reopening, you need to look at and check your water systems. You need to flush out your hot and cold water networks. So let's talk about that in a bit more detail. So the hot water system, that's the stuff connected to your boiler. The cold water system comes directly off the mains. So you have to flush both of these separately. So in terms of flushing your cold water system, you need to run all of your taps and showers and water using points and appliances until the water drops below 20 degrees. So your water needs to run cold. So you start from the outlet closest to the mains input. So that's closest to your meter. If you don't know where that is, that will probably be the side of the building that's closest to the road, because the mains water network will come off, will generally run under the road. So find that first point, turn the tap on very slowly to start with, particularly the first one you open. Otherwise, it will splash out, creating aerosols and go all over you. And remember that the pressures in your taps will be different to what you normally expect. This is because the water companies have been having to vary pressure across their network because so many businesses are closed. As the businesses reopen, then you'll get sudden changes in pressure. You'll also get trapped air. So when you see the water come out, you could see it looking almost milky or quite splashy or intermittent. So open your first outlet very slowly. Let it run until it's cold. You can do that with a thermometer, or you can do that with your hand, depending on whether you're wearing gloves or not. But make sure that you wash your hands with water that has run through the system after you've been touching the first flow that comes out. And also make sure that you're wearing a mask while you do this. So gradually open all of the outlets for cold water. Remember, there might well be some outdoor taps that you might not think of, or hoses in yards. Generally, it will take a few minutes to flush out your system, and it could take up to half an hour if you have low flow taps that are a long way from the source of the network. So basically, let it run until it's cold, and it will take longer than you think. So that's the cold network. It's also worth making sure that you keep an eye on water quality. You might also see that particulates might come out of the tap, so bits of scale and things like this, because as the pressure changes, you can get those dislodged from within the pipes. Also, look out for leaks as you repressurize and rerun the network. Basically, the network has just been sitting there full of water, not moving, and then suddenly you're changing this. So any sudden changes could cause leaks. Then your hot water system. The first thing to do in your hot water system is to charge up your boiler to 60 degrees. So your boiler has to be set to above 60 degrees. That may well be hotter than you normally have it, but you need it at that temperature to ensure that you're killing any Legionella and any other bacteria. So fire up your boiler. Once the boiler has reached the right temperature, then do the same with your hot water network that you do with the cold water network, starting with the outlets and appliances closest to the boiler. Slowly open them. In this circumstance, you're likely to get even more aerosol generation, so open the taps very, very slowly. Make sure you're wearing protective equipment. For things like showers, where if there's a detachable shower head, take the hose down close to the drain so it's below waist height, and that will ensure you've got less aerosol generation. Let the hot water run through your system so that it is hot as it comes out of the taps and showers. Again, ideally around 60 degrees. You may well get 1 or 2 degrees loss in temperature as it moves through the network, but you should be aiming for 60 degrees. Again, you can do that with a thermometer, or if it's hot to the point where it's steaming, then you know that should be okay. So make sure that you've got water from the boiler running through the system. It may well be, depending on the size of your boiler, that you might have to wait until the boiler refills and reboils to ensure that you flush out the whole system. This is why you've got 24 hours to do this. This will take quite a long time. Again, it could be 2 to 3 minutes for it to run through on some high use appliances. Generally, it will take about 10 minutes. In some circumstances, it could take up to 30 minutes. Again, do this systematically across the whole water system. Right, then what we've put here is beverage appliances. So as I've said before, clean out all other water using appliances, and don't forget built-in water and ice dispensers within fridges, all that sort of stuff. It's also worth cleaning and removing any nozzles. So if you're a school or someone with drinking fountains, if you possibly can, remove those nozzles, swill them in hot water and replace them. So this gives you a good opportunity to clean down all of your water using appliances anyway. And then the next bit, clean all leisure facilities and water features. So hot tubs, pools, that sort of stuff as well. In general, because of the chlorination that you see within pools are probably one of the safest places to be at the moment. So make sure you clean all water using features. And as I said, don't forget about other water systems. It may well be that you have water-based air conditioning systems, or cooling towers, or other things like that that you need to be aware of as well. As I said, this is a fairly slow process. As I've said, the first thing you probably need to do is to get a plan of your building and look at where all of the water use points are. It's also worth pointing out that if you're in a shared building, you will need to talk to the landlord and to other tenants, because if you run your pipes, that's fine. But if your neighbours or your landlord hasn't done the same thing, there are still sections of the network that are stagnant and could well have bacteria within them. So the whole system has to be flushed out. So before you return to your building, you need to check with the landlord what action they have taken or told their tenants to take to ensure that the water network is clean. If you have sensitive sites or complex sites, or sites that may have vulnerable staff or vulnerable customers or users, then you might want to think about using an external contractor to do this. Generally, it is fairly straightforward, particularly if you're a small business. However, it can be complex. If you are going to use an external organization, then make sure you either use a plumber who is WaterSafe registered, or a water system company that's registered with BISRA, or a Legionella company that's registered with the Legionella Control Association. If you go to those types of trade bodies, they will have lists of water professionals in your area that are registered, and they will be able to do this work for you. There are also online do-it-yourself Legionella testing kits that you can order. But again, be aware that you'll need to wear the right protective equipment while you're doing all of this. If you have any issues, you're more than free to contact myself or Marcus to talk about getting external people in. But this process should be something that you can do yourself, as long as you do it systematically and take care. So liaising with your water supplier. So we're in an unprecedented time. Large portions of the UK water supply network are operating at a lot lower than their normal supply. So you're seeing flows in water company networks are completely different to how they normally are. This means that they're having to vary pressure. You may also notice at home that your water smells more chlorinated. That's because water companies have been increasing the chlorine dose in some areas because of concerns about stagnant water. Because large numbers of people are at home, that means that there's increased domestic demand. So if you imagine a water network for a water company, there are some areas where demand has increased quite dramatically, other areas where demand has fallen off. So when businesses start to reopen, there will be variations in pressure as the network repressurizes and as flows change across the network. This could also mean that you're getting water being sourced from different suppliers to normal. So your water may look or taste slightly different to how it normally would. Now, that's quite difficult because you're supposed to be looking out for concerning issues with your water to do with contamination. And it might be that your actual normal water tastes slightly different. If you go onto your local water company's website and you type in your postcode, there will be a list of issues with pressure or quality in your postcode. So that's a good thing to do. It's also worth telling your water retailer when you're going to reopen for two reasons. One is that they can arrange that your billing is done correctly, or that if you've been classed as vacant, that vacancy can be taken off. The second one is if you're a large company, they can then inform the water supplier to make sure that the pressure is sufficient in your area. And thirdly, they will be able to tell you if there are any water pressure or water quality issues in your area. Right, if you are then getting your networks flushed out, or you're discharging large amounts of potentially contaminated water to sewer, or you've used cleaning chemicals or flushing chemicals, again, you should contact your water retailer because you might have to apply for what's called a temporary trade effluent license. These licenses are in place so that suddenly water companies don't see huge amounts of water going into their sewers or chemicals they're not expecting going into the sewer. Likewise, if you're disposing of a large amount of ice, if you're doing that to surface water, make sure that you're not contaminating any local streams. All of this is fairly basic advice. The difficulty is you've probably never done many of these things before because businesses haven't been closed down for this length of time. If you have any questions, you can talk to your water retailer, you could talk to your water company. There are also other bodies that will be able to provide specific advice. I think in general, that's the meat of what we want to talk about. Just to summarize, don't reopen your business until you've checked your water safety. People can die. People do die of Legionella. People can be severely poisoned. Unfortunately, the symptoms of this and the symptoms of COVID-19 are very similar. Main thing is make sure you fire up your boiler to over 60 degrees. As I've said, Legionella generally thrives between 20 degrees C and 60 degrees C. So if you've got warm, stagnant water, it loves that. Once you get your boiler above 60 degrees, it will die. Once you get your mains water cold enough to be below 20 degrees, again, it won't replicate in that area. Flush all of your water systems. So your hot water system and your cold water system, do it slowly and systematically. Check your water coolers, your drinks machines, anywhere where water may have been sitting stagnant within pipes. Could be water, could be ice, could be coffee, could be juices, any of those sorts of things. This is unusual, but as I said, buildings were abandoned within a matter of days. So you may just have a coffee machine that's been sitting there with coffee in it for 2 or 3 months. I think you'll immediately notice that's not a good thing. But swill all of these out. Quite often there will be manufacturer's instructions. If not, just use rinse with boiling water, but be careful of scalding. And again, in terms of care, make sure that you're wearing protective equipment while flushing your systems. I can see that a lot of people will do this without wearing protective equipment. The main reason being that they think that tap water's fine, that they think they don't need it. The particles of water that carry Legionella have to be small enough to enter your lungs. Quite often you can't see these in the air, and if you breathe them in, you can get Legionella, which has, as I say, has symptoms similar to COVID-19, gives you pneumonia and can kill you. So just make sure you're wearing something that covers your mouth. Liaise with your water retailer. You're paying them, so they are there to help you with this sort of stuff. Take care when you're disposing of any wastewater. And if you are suddenly disposing of very large amounts of liquid into the sewer or onto the ground, then either tell your water company or the Environment Agency, as you may be causing pollution. And then, as I said earlier, use this as an opportunity to review your water systems, see whether you might need your washrooms updated, whether you want to put in more water efficient supplies, whether actually you find a tap that's been running for the 3 months that you've been away. And this is an opportunity to review your water systems and to put in a long-term water management plan that will help with safety and will save you money and is good for the environment. Right, that's me for now.
Thank you very much, Jacob. We have lots of questions. So, Marcus, I've just opened up your line as well, just in case. So,
Okay, Rachel.
Question. I've got a question about taps. When you're flushing out the system, should you be running one tap at a time or all taps at once, or does it matter?
Okay, you need to start nearest the boiler or the inlet first, and you need to make sure that they either run cold for the cold network or hot for the hot network. If you can manage to do more than one at once, that's fine. I would suggest that you do cold, all of the cold ones first, and then all of the hot ones next. Otherwise, if you've got mixer taps, you could be mixing the two together. So I would flush through the cold network and then flush through the hot network. And yes, you can be running more than one tap at a time. It may well take longer if you run them all at the same time because you're dropping the pressure. But yes, if you have a washroom with 4 or 5 taps in, you can run them all at the same time. But again, be careful. Yeah.
But also on that point, Jacob, I advise people not to turn the taps on in a given area and just walk away, because you might find you've got blocked drains.
Yes, and flooding. Yes, absolutely. Yes, you should stay and monitor them. And again, beware of the amount of aerosols that you're generating. So if your room becomes unbelievably steamy when you're running the hot thing, that's not a good thing.
Okay. Are businesses obliged to do a dip test?
No, they are not. They are obliged to take all necessary precautions to prevent Legionella. Now, the more tests you do, yes, the better, but you need to put yourself in the position that someone gets ill. Have you done enough? Have you taken enough action to prevent that? That's why you need to have a plan and why you need to write down what you're doing. Marcus, have you got any other bits on that?
No, I fully agree. I think the main thing is to prove that you've actually gone through the process in a systematic manner and that you're compliant.
I mean, if you are running a pharmacy with vulnerable customers and you're really worried and you've had Legionella in there before and all this sort of stuff, then I would probably say, yes, get in an external professional. If you're a news agent and you've got a toilet and a tap, probably not.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions about cleaning products. One, what should we clean taps down with? And then somebody else who runs a dental surgery asking, is there a safe chemical that I can use to clean the dental water lines that's long-term effective and safe, etc.?
Marcus, do you want to?
Well, yes, there are products out there for managing that process. For actually cleaning outlets, Jacob mentioned that earlier in his presentation. Remove nozzles, remove filters. If filters are a low-cost item within a product, I'd say replace it. Then you know you're totally secure. There are cleaning products for cleaning water systems. There are various ones available on the market. If those particular persons asking that question want to get in touch with us after this webinar with specifics, Jacob and I, between us, can point them in the right direction.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'll pop that on the list.
For most circumstances, boiling water and physical scrubbing of the items should be sufficient, but it depends on the use.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question from somebody who has buildings that are been partly occupied, like schools.
Yeah.
Do you need to check the whole building or just the area that's been unoccupied?
Because the network is interconnected, you probably need to check the whole building, because imagine if you've got a school and you're using a couple of the classrooms and you're not using other areas, the other areas will have stagnant water within those pipes. So the Legionella can move from those pipes into the other. So unless they have a separate water network, so if you've got, say, a campus of a university, or you've got a large school with different buildings that have different networks, then you can do those separately. But personally, I would do the lot.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I've got another related question. People who've been going to the buildings and flushing through the taps for a few minutes once a week. Takes a few hours to do that. Is that sufficient?
It depends, but yes, that's excellent behavior. That's exactly what you should have done. You won't have stagnant water. I think it is still worth flushing the network. It might mean that flushing the network doesn't take very long at all. You'll immediately get hot water or cold water. I mean, but if you've been doing it, once or twice a week, then that should be sufficient. However, it depends on whether you've had the boiler fired up or not. You may have been running the taps, but it might be that your boiler is still sitting there at the wrong temperature. So the key thing is make sure you have your boiler fired up to above 60 degrees. You would need to do less if you've been maintaining the water systems during the shutdown, but I would still suggest that you put in place a plan for reopening and just take into account that you've already been taking actions. Sorry, okay. That's a bit vague. If anyone wants to get in touch with us specifically after, because it depends on the type of building, depends how long you've been doing it for, whether there's a management plan, whether you've had the hot water on or not.
Okay, so a follow up on a one-to-one basis. What about flushing toilets?
Okay, so this is a slightly more difficult one. So I would suggest that yes, you should flush your toilets, obviously with the lid down to prevent aerosols. The reason being that Legionella can grow within the cistern of the toilet sometimes. Then when you flush the toilet, you're creating an aerosol. So you've got particles of water going into the air. So I would just close the lid and flush the toilet. It is not, and then what will happen is it will refill from the mains. But again, you could say that the water coming into the cistern is potentially contaminated. How many times do you have to flush the toilet? Not thought about this one before. You should Yeah, you should be able to clear the network with 2 or 3 flushes. It is not a particularly high risk, the toilet. But yeah, two or three flushes should be enough to clean out the system.
Okay, all right.
Oh,
Do we
sorry,
have?
the other thing on that, the other thing is that if you have water storage tanks, which a system is a small one, you need to empty those. So any water storage tanks would need to be emptied and refilled.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any sample checklist type documents that somebody could use as a tick list and save in case of an inspection?
No, we've been asked by our customers to produce one of those, and I'm actually working on that. I suppose we could make one of those and put it on the Ecoprod website, Marcus. Do you want?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
if people think that would be useful, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question of somebody with a water tower. What do we need to do with a water tower that has a sealed water bottle?
Oh, I think you've got to empty it. I think it would need to be completely emptied and then refilled. But again, I'm happy to take that question because it specifically depends on the type of water tower.
Yeah, lots of factors.
But any water storage like that where there's been no movement, it depends on its size and how long it would take to empty out. But I mean, for some of our customers where they've got large scale on-site storage, we're telling them to completely empty them and refill them.
Okay, all right. Does it make a difference, different pipe materials, plastic, copper, etc.? Does that alter the flushing requirement?
Right, under the Water Regulations Advisory Scheme, under RAS, all of those materials should behave within a certain way. No, you've got to flush until you get cold water or hot water on your respective networks. It will mean that your scale buildup is different. It will also mean that the growth of bacteria, the rate of growth of bacteria is different. So copper pipes, it's lower, dark plastic pipes is higher, for instance. But because in the UK, because of RAS, generally all pipe materials shouldn't add to contamination. But yes, you do the same thing.
Okay. I've got a question just confirming the temperatures. So somebody's been given a recommendation that need to flush above 55 degrees C. I think you said 60.
Yes. So the ideal temperature for Legionella is around 50 degrees centigrade. It can exist between 20 degrees and 60 degrees. Above 55, it's less likely. My recommendation would be to fire your boiler up to 60. That means that when you run some of the hot taps, because of temperature loss across the network, you may be recording 57, 58 at some of the outlets. That's okay. The main thing is get the boiler up to 60 degrees. The information that was given out by the Center for Disease Control in the United States was incorrect. They said that you need to fire your boiler and get your systems up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. That's wrong. And they actually retracted that. In Fahrenheit, it needs to be 140 degrees. So I would say 60 degrees. So fire your boiler up to 60 degrees and try and reach 60 degrees at as many outlets as you can. But obviously, if you're a university or a local council or a school and you've got a massive site, you will get some drop in temperature. But I would go for 60 rather than 55.
Okay, thank you. Are there any change in risk factors for a soft versus a hard water area, or is it just the same?
So you do the same things. However, hard water areas, because you're getting scale deposits within the pipes, It means that you can get potentially higher growth of biofilm. In a hard water area, you might see more particulates coming out of the taps, so bits of scale getting dislodged within the pipes. That's fine. You do the same thing.
Okay, thank you. Any special actions for air conditioning units?
I am not an air conditioning expert. If it is an adiabatic air conditioning system or a water-based one, I would suggest that you get a HVAC expert in to look at it, or you look at the manufacturer's instructions. Otherwise, you would need to run your air conditioning systems with people not in the room for a period of time. But as I say, I am not an expert on aircon, so I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
No, I fully agree. If I was the person asking that question and the owner or the manager of that property, I'd say if you've got a HVAC contractor that looks after your equipment, get them to site, just explain your fears and ask them for their expert opinion on the process that should be followed through, get it documented, and get them to price. If it's outside your standard yearly contract, get them to price that specific, but make sure the whole thing's documented so you can prove that the whole process has been followed through according to the manufacturer's instructions.
Okay, thank you. I've got somebody who's been getting some advice from a Legionella monitoring contractor suggesting that they should disinfect all water systems. Is that required, or would just flushing be adequate, or is there some circumstance that might make that a requirement?
It depends on the site. So we have a lot of customers who disinfect their networks annually or biannually anyway. Disinfecting your networks is not going to cause you any problems. It is a good thing to do. It's just a balance between cost and risk. So if you are a clinic or people getting cancer treatment or something like that, then I would suggest that you do everything you can to disinfect your network. Again, if you are a small newsagent or a lawyer's office, then you probably don't need to go to that level. If a Legionella expert has told you to do that, and they are registered with any of the Legionella organizations, then I would follow their advice.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good, thank you. You mentioned two professional bodies earlier. BISRA was one and there was another. Could you just clarify those names, please?
LCA, so the Legionella Control Association. And the other one was Water Safe, which is a bit like Gas Safe, but it's for plumbers. So if you're using a plumber, make sure they're on the Water Safe register. So there is a website, Water Safe, and they have lists of plumbers by postcode. Likewise, the Legionella Control Association have a list of their members by postcode.
Okay, thank you. I've got somebody who's got a building where most of the occupants are away from work, but they do have occasional visitors. They need to make sure that the occasional visitors who attend, perhaps, on the off chance, don't think it's business as usual. Is there some special tasks that they need to take in that situation, or warning signs up, or?
Yeah, it's a bit like if you've been away on holiday for 2 weeks, you don't just come in and drink from the tap immediately. You let the tap run. So they would need to treat it in the same way. There are not any specific posters or documents or anything like that. Again, we are preparing some for some of our customers who have caravan parks for their caravan owners. So I suppose it's quite similar to that. And again, if we're doing the other thing, I'm sure we could do that and help put that on the Ecoprod website.
Yeah.
If that works. But I don't know of any official posters, but we can certainly help people make one if they like.
Okay, thank you. A question about flushing foul. Any remaining solids that have dried and blockages that may have occurred? Anything in particular to pay attention to?
Yeah, this is the same as having to flush the traps. So, given the amount of water that you're probably going to be flushing through the system as you flush out your hot and cold networks, that should shift anything that's in your sewers, hopefully. If not, then contact your water company, or again, get in a water safe plumber. It's very difficult to know. It depends on the angle of incline of the sewer. It depends on what the use is. But yeah, it's a good point. And to be honest, I don't know, because it depends on individual circumstances. But the amount of water going through should be sufficient to clear your sewers out.
We've got a similar question about lime scale build-up.
Yeah.
Any particular actions, or just use your regular lime scale cleaner?
Use the regular lime scale cleaner, but beware that you will get lime scale becoming dislodged within the pipe network and within outlets as soon as you turn the pressure back on. And as Marcus said earlier, if you've got any filters, it's probably worth just replacing those, because they'll be clogged with lime scale, and that particularly relates to things like Brita water jugs. Other brands are available, where you should replace your filters, or the filters in fridges. And also, if you have taps with regulators or with stream straighteners at the end, then you'll have to unscrew those and let out any scale that has accumulated at the back of those from the pipes. I mean, again, it's a good time to assess what type of devices you've got within your washrooms. Mark is probably better to answer this one than me, actually.
Yeah, well, on that point, Jacob, I would also say when you're doing the flushing of your systems, especially with taps and shower, take the shower head off, if possible. Take the aerators out of the end of taps, and so on and so forth, because you don't want a situation where you've done all this flushing and then you find you've got low flow through some of your outlets. Likelihood is that low flow is due to filters being blocked. So I would advise removing the filters to start with, and you're sort of killing two birds with one stone, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. Hot water storage tanks, will those automatically be sterilised when the hot water boilers are run?
Yes, so if you've got those, then this is why I was talking about, some people are giving the advice about running taps for 2 minutes or 5 minutes. This is why it can take up to 30 minutes. And in Canada, the government has said that you have to do it for 30 minutes. The reason is you'll need to empty these storage tanks as well. So you'll need to empty out the storage tank and then wait for the hot water to come from the boiler back into the tank and then into the tap. So this could take quite a long time. Same with cold water tanks. So in both circumstances, you have to run the taps and the outlets until the water is hot or cold, depending on your network. So yes, they will sterilize once the hot water from the boiler comes into them. If they are very large tanks, or if you're the landlord of a large office block, then I think you would need to look at potentially cleaning and disinfecting the tanks, depending on their size and depending on their condition. Again, if you're a small building, you won't need to look at this, but if you're a very large building, you would, and you would need to probably visually inspect the tank. But if you're one of those buildings, you'll probably have a water management company anyway, who comes in and looks at your network, so talk to them. It's very much depending on risk, scale, and cost. So you need to take the actions that you think will make the building safe. And you need to document to show that you've done that.
Yeah, okay. You mentioned somewhere that people could check local water issues by postcode. Could you just reconfirm where that is?
Okay, so this would be your individual water company. So if you don't know who your water company is, then you can go on to an organisation called Water UK, which is the trade body for the UK water industry. So it's water.org.uk. And if you type find my water company, or you can type that in Google, actually find my water company, it will take you to the Water UK page. You then put in your postcode and it tells you which water company you are with. Go to the website of that water company and they will have a part on their website that says find issues in my area, or sometimes it will say my postcode. Put in your postcode and it will give you a list of whether there's work being done in the area, whether there's water quality issues, whether there's low pressure. Otherwise, you can look on your water bill and phone up your water retailer, who should also be able to tell you this. And if none of that works, give me or Marcus a call and we'll help.
Okay, thank you. What about automatic toilets that heat water? Something like closer-mat.
Automatic toilets that heat water?
I know. I'm just reading it out.
Marcus? I don't know of automatic toilets that heat water.
Yeah, exactly the same process.
Okay. So the person who asked that question, I'll follow up with you separately as well. Would you recommend using something like a Milton sterilizer for kettles and kind of kitchen equipment?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would. I mean, just to wipe the inside of a kettle, or you could take off the nozzles or things like that and put them into Milton. I mean, again, there are other options, but something like that. It depends. Do what you would do if it depends on what's going on. So if you open up the kettle and there is a hideous ring of scale and what looks like biofilm, then yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I think I've reached the end of my questions. So, oh no, I've got one more. Small point of use water heaters run cold quickly. Is that sufficient if it runs cold?
Right. Point of use water heaters. They boil water instantaneously. So I would first of all set them to heat the water, and then run the pipe and the nozzle through with the hot water. And then in terms of them running from the network, you need to run them. Oh, this is a difficult one actually. I know from a heating perspective, I haven't thought about it from a cold water perspective. They need to be sufficient that you've drained that aspect of the network. So it depends where they are. Can you drop us an email about that one? Because it very much depends on what they're being fed from and where they are. Because if they were at the end of quite a long pipe network, then irrespective of the fact that they run cold quickly, you need to drain that pipe network. So it could still be 5 to 10 minutes of running them.
Yeah,
hot water bit easy.
It's running from the mains, but the person who asked that question, I will get in touch with separately. So a question that says, is Legionella within the water or is it in the scale and the biofilm? Therefore, the water is the transmission fluid, if you see what I mean. Where is the Legionella?
In the water.
In the water.
Legionella grows in the water, and then it attaches itself to water droplets. Individual Legionella bacteria, you have to have water droplets that are large enough to be able to carry Legionella, but also small enough to get into the lung. The biofilm is a bacterial buildup, so it could well be within there as well, and the scale just acts as a nice growing medium. But the Legionella will be within the water, and if you flushed your networks through with hot or cold water, that will be sufficient to kill the bacteria that is within the biofilm or within any scale. So what we've talked about here, as long as you're getting to the right temperature, you're cleaning your pipes out, unless you think your network is very old and potentially highly contaminated, then you probably need to call in a Legionella expert.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so I think I'm out of questions and I think we are also out of time. So thank you very much to our presenters today. Thank you very much to all the people who attended. There are a few people that I've agreed to follow up with, and some questions that I've been using on the chat. I will come back to all of the people who haven't had a direct answer here later today and tomorrow. You will get a recording, a link to watch the recording of this session, and you will get the slides as well. If you have any additional questions, please do get in touch with us. Our contact details will be in your registration emails and will be in your confirmation. When you get the links through, please do get in touch with us and we'll help wherever we can. So thank you again to the presenters and attendees, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rachel.